So, looking at a couple of problems, let's look at these two trains. They're two exact same train sets, and they're both headed for the exact same destination. They have the exact same number of cars, of seats, of everything. What makes this train number one and this train number two? Why can't this be train number one and this one number two? Sometimes identity is simply some type of marking that we place on it. So it turns out that this is train number one, heading from Paris to Brussels, because we've said this one will be called train one. And train one leaves at 9:05 every morning, and it has a certain time schedule, and so it has a certain identity to it. This is train two, it leaves at 9:08. It follows a little slightly different path, but it still also gets to Brussels. If we change them, it will start to cause confusion because people who come to expect the 9:05 that goes directly to Brussels, and now the 9:05 is the 9:08, which is going from different places and finally arrives in Brussels 40 minutes later than the 9:05 one, etc. The idea is that this is the socially constructed identity model. That if we take it from a person and we put it to an inanimate object, there are just certain things that we expect that will happen once we know that one thing has an identity. Planes are the exact same way. When you get on board a flight, there's nothing inherent in that flight that it's called Flight 274. That's just a number that's been given to it to make it easier. And at heart, think about this. This goes back to the naming of us. Just like this train doesn't have the option of getting called number one, I was not given the option of calling myself John. That was given to me by my parents. And then that becomes a part of my identity by virtue of just having been given to me and grow into it. So the same thing we have with inanimate objects we can see in the animate world as well. Psychological approaches. The memory criterion we talked about, that if A is B, if A can remember all of B's experiences or thoughts. So if we have the ninth doctor who regenerates into the 10th can remember all of the things that the ninth doctor has done, has all of his thoughts, all of his feelings, all of his experiences, then we can say that the 10th doctor is the ninth doctor, even though he's had a complete change of appearance. And then when 10 regenerates into 11, we can say that since 11 remembers all of 10's thoughts, experiences, and can remember all of 9's thoughts and experiences, then he must be 10 and 9. So the doctor's psychological approaches through the memory criterion come into play quite frequently. That's one way that we know that he's still the same, because he remembers everything from regeneration to regeneration. Whereas the memory criterion would not work in an inanimate object, for example. If we asked the train, are you train 1 or train 2? The train would have no idea, because the train doesn't have memory and have the ability to remember prior events, experiences, thoughts, whereas people do, the doctor does, and because the doctor is able to remember those past experiences, then we can say that 8 is 9, 9 is 10, 10 is 11, and vice versa. So since the 11th doctor can remember being the 9th, he must be the same. Even though his genetics have switched up a little bit, he looks a little different, his face is a little bit different, he thinks a slightly bit differently, all of his memories are intact, so at least by one of the different ways of looking at personal identity. Second, societal. We all look at him as the doctor. We accept that this is the doctor at one point, and then he regenerates, and now this is the doctor, and he regenerates, and this is the doctor. So social construction of his identity also takes place by us accepting that he is the doctor. So what if the doctor had total amnesia? He could remember nothing of any of his previous lives, or he were brainwashed so that he were psychologically radically different than before, but he'd still be the same person. According to many approaches, the animal approach, which we had looked at last week, they would say yes, because he still has that same DNA no matter what. On the psychological approach, it would be no, because he would have to have the memory. 11 would have to remember 10, who would have to remember 9, who would have to remember 8, etc., in order for it to be a continuous connection between them. Each one must remember all of the previous experiences and thoughts. So on one aspect, we would say no. If he totally loses his memory, or if he goes into a chameleon arc, or he does something that he's not the doctor, and he says, I'm not the doctor. The essence of the doctor is stored elsewhere because I won't have those memories. But as soon as those memories return. So it seems like for the doctor, we are focusing on the psychological approach and the memory approach.